We don't expect people to vanish from our lives, never to be heard of again.
67 women murdered or missing between Newcastle and Byron Bay, and their cases remain unsolved.
The police thought Leanne was just a runaway. That was it.
She would never turn her back on her children, never.
Many of these cases are linked.
Had patterns been missed?
There was a serial killer or serial killers operating on the mid-north coast.
One of the last times I ever hitchhiked. It shook me to the core.
The north coast of New South Wales, on the east coast of Australia, is an incredible place. It is a paradise. Beautiful, pristine beaches.
Quite free and easy, and it's an idyllic place to be.
It's one of the most beautiful places in Australia. Like, visually, it's striking. The beaches are stunning, the sand is white and the water is green and blue.
The lifestyle is really laid back. The summers are hot, it's all about barbecues and beaches, but the winters are also mild, paradise. The North Coast region really is an iconic part of Australia. It runs from the eastern seaboard, from the city of Newcastle, 2 hours north of Sydney, to the beautiful Byron Bay.
But it also has that dark underside.
There's a sense of free abandon. People think that they're safe because everyone has a good vibe to them. I think that's a mistake.
When you're carefree and easy, sometimes you let your guard down. There is a dark side to this region. It's well documented, and you can't hide from that.
I moved to the mid-north coast of New South Wales, Bellingen, in 2015. Bellingen's a tiny place between Newcastle to Byron Bay. Beautiful little rural village, a couple thousand people with a few more thousand people scattered in the hills. My name is Jeremy Buckingham. I'm a Member of Parliament, and my mission, my life's mission now, is to find answers to what happened to the murdered and missing women on the north coast of New South Wales. This is where we used to come and walk. We'd walk the dogs along this track every afternoon, a bit of fresh air, listen to the birds. But just over the hill here, there's a bit of a spot that's a little bit eerie. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes you walk into a house or you're in a certain spot and you get a weird feeling. And that's what happened here. I said to my wife, has something ever happened in this area? Something ever happened in this forest? And she said, well, just down the road, Rose Howell had disappeared a couple of decades before. I'd never heard of it, Rose Rain Howell, and I thought, how could it be that a woman had disappeared from this area? I'd never heard of it, so I started looking into it. I went home that night, sat down with a cup of tea and Googled up missing woman Bellingen. Rose Rain Howell, just 19 years old, had been a young woman, active, making plans, moving through the community, well known, well liked, and she had been hitchhiking, looking for a lift not far out of Bellingen when she just disappeared in the early 2000s. This is the old Pacific Highway just outside Bellingen. It's the last place that Rose Howe was ever seen alive. She'd been in town printing out invitations for her birthday, and she was travelling back home to the hippie commune, Bundadjan, just off in the bush there. Two people saw her walk towards a white car over here, and she was never seen again. Rose was the first case that I looked into, and I was shocked because not far from where I lived on the old Pacific Highway in the mid-90s, another young woman, Inika Hinckley, had been found, and she had been murdered and raped and her body dumped near an old truck stop on that Pacific Highway. Inika Hinckley was just 20 years old when she set out from Melbourne, travelling to Byron Bay on the north coast, a young musician with her whole life in front of her. It was 1996 when her body was found in this bush just over here. And you've got to consider this is just 1 kilometre from where 6 years later Rose Howe disappeared. Then I found a young mother, Susan Kiley, vanished, and the police had done almost nothing to investigate what happened to her. I just couldn't believe it. How could there be 3 women disappeared, one of them had been found murdered in this tiny little community, and almost no one was talking about it, and I wondered if this was symptomatic of a broader pattern.
My name's Gary Kiley. Regrettably, my sister Susan was, I have no doubt, murdered on December 1 or thereabouts in 1989. There's Susan in one of my favourite photos of her, happy and carefree in her early days. Susan was living up in Bellingen, the north coast of New South Wales, in the late 80s. She had divorced her husband, but she was, I think, fairly desperate to break away. So that's where she went with her daughter, Heidi. And also the hinterland of Bellingen is very attractive, very wooded. There's creeks, there's rivers, nice country town in New South Wales. So I could see why Susan would have been attracted to perhaps move to the north coast. This is a photo of Susan much later with Heidi, the younger daughter. We think Heidi must have been about 4 at that stage. Susan was living in some humble place just outside of Bellingen on New South Wales north coast with her younger daughter, Heidi. And Heidi was put on the school bus that morning. My sister had to then go into town at Bellingen, and as was her habit, she hitchhiked. She had no other means of getting in there. And she then joined some friends in town. They socialised for some time. Susan apparently then went to go to the bank. And that was it. After that time, no one can say what happened to Susan. At the time of Susan's disappearance, Heidi was 8 years old. When she got back from school that day, back in 1989, the house was vacant and her mother wasn't there. basic policing wasn't done, such as, in a normal course of events, you would expect that that house would have been a potential scene of a crime, or perhaps a homicide. I know she would never, ever just dump her daughter under those circumstances. I can only conclude that she was murdered. She would never turn her back on her children, never. No one conducted any interviews with people in the main street of Bellingen. No interviews were conducted. Records are scant about what police activity did take place. People that were interviewed about the disappearance, none of their alibis were rigorously questioned or checked. It took us 21 years to get a coroner's inquest. The coroner, he opened up proceedings by saying to the police that were in attendance, why has this taken 21 years for Susan's disappearance to come to a coroner's inquest? He made the point that a lot happens in 21 years, and people who may have been prime suspects are perhaps have disappeared, could even be dead. And because of that, we've all suffered, and justice hasn't been done.
Talking to Gary Kiley was just such a shocking experience, because here was this man, his sister has disappeared, he's wondering every day what has happened to her. The coronial inquest said that the police did not have any evidence they could provide of what they had done at the time to actually investigate her disappearance. So how could that be the situation? How does a family deal with that their sister is disappeared, probably murdered, and the police are doing absolutely nothing? It's hard not to be affected when you look at these stories. You know, I'd lost my son to suicide. That's something that happened. You understand loss. What it is to, you know, you understand what it is to lose a child. And it's, you know, terrible. You know, and I know what happened to my son, but to imagine, you know, not knowing, or an even worse circumstance. Try and deal with that.
Jeremy Buckingham became determined. He knew he had to keep digging because the disappearance of Susan Kiley and Rose Rain Howe, as well as the murder of Inika Hinkley in his hometown of Bellingen, have remained unsolved for decades. I'm Dimity Clancy. I'm a reporter with 60 Minutes, and I've covered crime for a lot of my career. The scale of what he uncovered is shocking. Jeremy Buckingham knew he had to keep digging because the disappearance of Susan Kiley and Rose Rain Howe, as well as the murder of Inika Hinkley in his hometown of Bellingen in Australia, have remained unsolved for decades. Someone knows something, and the killers are still getting away with it.
Well, what I did was look at whether or not what was happening in Bellingen and around was systemic across the mid-North Coast. And so I started Googling up articles about murdered and missing women in the period from the 1970s to early 2000s. And what I found again and again and again, there were just more and more and more. It went from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 into the 30s. 30 murdered and missing women on the mid-North Coast that I could find just by Googling up documents. And I thought, how many more are there? I also asked the police through the parliamentary process how many more did they know of which weren't on my list. And some weeks later they came back shockingly, staggeringly, to say that there was another 35, which took the list to 67 unsolved homicides and disappearances on the north coast of New South Wales.
67 cases of murdered and missing women. It's an appalling and heartbreaking number.
So I thought to myself, I'm going to raise this in the New South Wales Parliament. I'm going to use the resources of the Parliament to find out what has been done to get justice for these women. It's an absolute anomaly, an appalling anomaly, and has every indication that someone operated in that area, travelled that area, lived across that area and took women, destroyed their bodies, destroyed their lives. And it is a stain on our society, and it's appalling that it's taken so long for this matter to come before the House and to public attention.
My name is Damien Loon. I'm a former detective sergeant and I've served for 35 years in the New South Wales Police Force. I have worked on probably 40 to 50 homicides. I've investigated a number of cold case murders, and I was amazed, 67. That to me tells us we have a problem. And I was astounded. It seems to me that no one's talked to each other to say that, hey, we've got a problem here, particularly in this region, this area, that there's a lot of people gone missing and nothing's been done about it.
Initially, the reaction was head-scratching and people thought I was a bit bonkers. They thought I was, you know, off in the weeds on some conspiracy theory. But when they read the list, and then when I raised the further list that the police had given me, there was total shock.
How could so many women go missing or be murdered in the one area over such a long period of time and their cases remain unsolved?
Until I started asking questions, no one had put this list together. That's what's so shocking, that no one in the police had come out and said, look, we've got a problem. We've got an issue that has to be dealt with. We want the community to get behind us in finding out what happened to these women who died, some of them, in appalling, appalling murders. And it appears the police did very little. Sometimes they did nothing for decades, not even interviewing families for up to 20 years after the fact. That is an absolute disgrace.
Until Jeremy Buckingham started to link these cases, literally year by year, town by town, nobody had any idea of the scale of the missing and murdered women between Newcastle and Byron Bay in Australia. Nearly 70 women over a 30-year period.
Is this 67 individual disappearances and homicides, or is it possible that some of them are linked in terms of the perpetrator, the MO, etc.? So I reached out to Xanthi Mallet. She's one of the most respected criminologists and academics working in this space, and she's well known in Australia for her analysis of criminals, criminal behaviour and serial killers in Australia. And I asked her to have a look at this data.
My name is Dr. Xanthi Mallet, and I'm an Associate Professor of Criminology at Central Queensland University. My area of expertise is criminology. I focus a lot on gendered violence, specifically women as both victims and offenders, and the crossover within the criminal justice space. But my background is truly forensic science, so I bring together the hard science of forensics and the behavioural science of criminology. I must admit I was quite shocked by the sheer numbers of cases. So my colleagues and I looked at data of missing and murdered women from 1977 along that corridor between the Newcastle and Byron regions. We started to look at patterns. Was there one individual who looked like they could have been responsible for a number of these cases? Had patterns been missed? What is going on that highway? Is there something victimology-wise about these groups, that tells us that this could be the same offender, or is it the area in which the offender appeared to be comfortable? When we started to look at the data between Newcastle and Byron, we noticed that there were more cases coming up in distinct regions. I think we're looking at different clusters. We believe there are 2, 3, maybe as many as 4 that have acted as serial predators along that highway.
So when you look at the north coast of New South Wales, you basically have cities every 80 to 100 kilometres up the coast. They're ... and little villages in between. But it's a strip that runs south to north. When you map it out, everywhere along that Pacific Highway, there are murdered and missing women, all the way along, and clusters in certain areas like Newcastle, Bellingen and Byron Bay. If you compare it to other areas that have a similar geography, similar demographics, there is nothing like it. It shows that something sinister and evil has been happening in this area for decades.
The Pacific Highway is one of Australia's most important and travelled transport links. But with 67 women either murdered or missing between Newcastle and Byron Bay, this really is a highway of horror.
When my colleagues and I started to look at this pattern of disappearances and murders along that coastal route, we noticed that there were specific areas where there was more activity. What it does highlight is a number of clusters that warrant further investigation. A cluster of cases are cases that could potentially be linked, that appear quite superficially to have certain things in common. So, for example, biological sex, age and situation. And some of those cases within that cluster may be connected by a perpetrator, for example. But just because you have a cluster of young people in one area doesn't necessarily mean it's all the same offender, but it does warrant some further investigation. So one cluster is the Newcastle cluster. We have Leanne Goodall, we have Robin Hickey and Amanda Robinson. Girls from the ages of 15 to 20 who all disappeared within, just a short time period of each other in such a small geographic area.
My name's Jane Goldsmith and I've been a reporter with NBN News for 24 years. I've covered numerous missing persons cases over that time, particularly missing young girls in the Hunter region. So on April 7, 1979, Robin Hickey, who was just 18, went missing from a bus stop at Belmont North. She'd been waiting at the bus stop, we believe, and she hasn't been seen since. Now, just 2 weeks later, 15-year-old Amanda Robinson had been at a school dance, and she was on a bus back to Swansea, quite close to Belmont. She made it to Swansea, we believe, but didn't make it home to her family that night. She was just 15 years old. Another local woman, Leanne Goodall, was last seen at Muswellbrook Railway Station, and she hasn't been seen since. Now, her sister, Pam, believes she may not have ever made it onto that train.
It's like the never-ending battle. Like it just never stops because there's no answers. No answers at all. My name is Pam Mitchell. My sister was Leanne Goodall, who disappeared 47 years ago, and her murder is still unsolved. Leanne was a free spirit. If she wanted to have a job, she'd have a job. If she wanted to take off, you know, hitching up the coast, she'd do that. You know, she was always on the go. Always on the go. She just, yeah, loved life, loved travel. You know, she just loved everybody, you know, and everybody loved her.
Now, Leanne Goodall was sighted that night on a bus at Belmont. So it's very possible she also went missing from around the same area as Amanda and Robin, and only a few months earlier.
We realised there was something wrong when Leanne was due to start at the art college and she didn't arrive back to start that course which she'd been accepted into. When she didn't arrive, my mum and my brother Warren went to the police. The police investigation was extremely minimal. You know, they didn't interview my brother that, you know, that Leanne shared a flat with. They didn't interview me. They didn't interview any other brothers. You know, they didn't interview anyone. They didn't go down and see her friends that she was going to Sydney with. The police thought Leanne was just a runaway. That was it.
It seems absolutely unbelievable that the family members weren't interviewed, that police didn't take it seriously at the time. But again, she was treated as a runaway.
The disappearance of Leanne Goodall is absolutely concerning as to the investigation or the lack thereof.
So that was the last official sighting for a long time. And then a friend we went to school with come forward and said that she'd seen Leanne at the Star Hotel on the 31st of December.
There was some conjecture if she was actually at the Star Hotel. This is a hotel also frequented by serial killer Ivan Milat, who was convicted of 7 backpacker murders. But when the family members aren't interviewed and cross-referenced with what they're saying, you paint a picture where you may be looking at the wrong area. And to be told that she's 20 and she can do what she wants and she can run away, is certainly not good enough. These women are walking home from her friends, walking home from a dance, doing that every normal daily routine. Is it a spontaneous reaction that they're abducted off the street, or is it well planned? And there seems to be a similarity there with these young women going missing.
The other 3 young women who disappeared between 1979 and 1980 that I have included in the Newcastle cluster because of the situation in which they disappeared and their age range. So we have Amanda Zollis, Joy Hodgins, and Annie Tomanak. They're all between that kind of 14 and 20, so all vulnerable in that sense, and all young females. So what we have to realise for all 6 of these girls through to young women, they disappeared over such a short space of time, and they are actually geographically quite close. So that does seem like a really significant number of disappearances and murders that are currently unexplained. So I think certainly this particular cluster does need further investigation. I do believe that some of these girls and young women could actually be additional Milat victims.
Ivan Milat, one of Australia's most notorious psychopathic serial killers, was operating in the Newcastle area in the 1970s and 80s, working up there. And at that time, we saw a cluster of disappearances of young women that fit his MO. People picked up and disappeared. The question has to be asked, was he responsible? There's an enormous number of unsolved homicides. Some of them are clustered, and it has to be properly reinvestigated.
Ivan Milat is notorious in Australia. Between 1989 and 1992, he murdered at least 7 people, but he's long been suspected of having killed many more victims.
After Ivan Milat was found guilty of these 7 backpacker homicides and being led into a prison van, the corrective services officer was a former police officer. And as he led him into the back of the van, he said, well, they haven't found half of them.
Ivan Milat was a dangerous, deranged psychopath.
He was best described, I think, as a marauding serial killer, an opportunist. He would drive up and down the highway, and if people were hitchhiking, he would then strike. I'm Tim Watson-Munro. I'm a criminal psychologist with 47 years' experience. I was involved in assessing crimes of Ivan Milat, Australia's worst serial killer. I think he always had murder on his mind. He would be waiting for the opportunity.
Well, hitchhiking was, and to a limited extent still is, part of the fabric of this community. It's how you got around. There's no public transport. A lot of people didn't have the money, couldn't afford a car to get around. So they hitchhiked, they were always bludging lifts off friends, or if they're walking home from the pub, they're walking home from the pub because there's no taxi, there's no bus, there's no train.
But we do know that when people used to hitchhike, when we used to believe in the 70s and 80s that, you know, this was a safer activity, that often that can lead police to go, oh, well, they're just, you know, they're moving around, they could be anywhere. So there's almost a dismissal of some of those individuals.
I think this is symptomatic of the time, victim blaming. Police and some in the community saying, oh, well, they shouldn't have been hitchhiking. They're walking home from the pub drunk. They're on a remote local road, so they were asking for it. That's an appalling attitude today. Some people in the 70s and 80s would have had that, but it's utterly unacceptable.
Ultimately, we have to remember that hitchhiking makes you incredibly vulnerable. You are literally asking a stranger to stop and you get into their car. So for a predator, that is the ultimate playfield, isn't it? You know, you can literally stop and they're at your mercy.
Milat operated as a road gang member, and wherever he worked, people tended to disappear.
I've looked very closely at Ivan Milat, not only for the crimes that we know that he committed, but also those that we suspect he may have had an involvement in. And we do know that Ivan Milat was familiar with the Newcastle area. He did drive up and down that highway, definitely within what I would class as a Milat comfort zone.
In the 2002 coronial inquest, Ivan Milat was named as a suspect of Leanne, Amanda and Robin homicides.
Police weren't taking any chances with one of the state's most dangerous criminals. Milat escorted to the inquest under heavy guard. The entire court complex was locked down, only a handful of lawyers, media and family allowed inside. Milat has been named as one of the main suspects in the murders of Leanne Goodall, Robin Hickey and schoolgirl Amanda Robinson.
Well, Ivan Milat was in the coronial inquiry where my family and the Robinson family and the Hickey family all sat in a room with, well, we all sat in a room and he gave you chills. You could just see the coldness in him, but yes, it wasn't a good feeling. It was scary to think that, you know, that your sister's murderer could have been just there, and that's scary.
And I thought, oh my God. It's horrific to think that he got her.
Well, Ivan Milat could have been a suspect, mainly because, you know, he'd murdered other people and, you know, picked up other hitchhikers. He worked in the area at the time, but I don't really know.
In front of the families of the deceased, Ivan Milat made cruel and unwanted comments, suggesting that they had been negligent in terms of not reporting the disappearance in a quick period of time, and more generically that they should have been more vigilant to the whereabouts of their children, allowing them to be out and about unsupervised at that age. Those comments, I think, give you a window into the mind and thinking of a psychopath and a serial killer, and he is acknowledged as Australia's worst serial killer. There's no empathy, no remorse, no caring for the survivors of the deceased. It's all about, I think, power, adding to their distress by tormenting them. And this tends to be one of the themes with serial killers.
Ivan Milat never admitted any guilt to the 7 murders he was convicted of, and went to the grave still saying he didn't commit the terrible killings. So sadly, it was unlikely that he was ever going to shed any light on the disappearance of Leanne Goodall, Robin Hickey and Amanda Robinson.
And he said he didn't do it. But, you know, you can't believe a psychopath. How many other crazy people are there out in the world? You know, how many other psychopaths? How many copycat killers? Who knows? Like, it might have been Ivan Milat, but might not have too.
I believe that Milat was responsible for some of those disappearances, and ultimately that those young women are deceased. But whether we will ever be sure, I don't know.
Well, what's tragic is not only the crimes and the injustice of what happened to these young women, but the impact it's had on their families and the broader community. It just trickles down through scores and possibly hundreds of people if you really add it all up. So in reaching out to the families, I saw that they were still grieving. They were still absolutely ruined by these tragedies, by these murders, by these disappearances. And they felt it every day. And they were pleased that someone cared. Another person was taking up the issue, was going to raise it in Parliament, because they never give up. And that's the key thing. We can never give up on these women. I ask the government, I ask anyone to say it's not the case. The worst serial killer in the nation's history has gotten away with it. Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders. There is someone on the North Coast that has murdered as many or more, and they are still amongst us if they haven't died or fled the country. The worst crime in our state's history is unresolved.
I've worked with families of victims of crime for many years now, and personally I never give up hope looking for answers. What struck me through my experience with those families is that the pain is as raw to them today as it was when it happened. It never goes away.
For these families, it's 30 to 40 years of pain, suffering, anguish, not knowing what happened to these girls.
With Leanne, like, there was no funeral, you know, but it is hard because you've got nowhere to go and have a chat to them or take flowers or anything like that. It's just, it's like a no man's land.
In our situation, you always hope, but experience teaches you that after a certain amount of time and you're bound to be disappointed again. There's no such thing as closure in this work.
Jim Hickey spent a lifetime searching for answers about his girl, Robin Hickey. And one of the things he said to me is, well, if we're going to get answers, they have to come soon because I'm not going to last forever. And that has stayed with me because only a couple of years later, Jim died. And he went to his grave not knowing what happened to Robin.
The whole family is broken about Leanne. It takes a toll, especially on my mum. I mean, having kids myself, I couldn't stand the thought of, you know, like losing a child like that, you know, and not knowing where they were. Mum died in 2012, heartbroken. So, yeah, it's very hard.
Mum and Dad, like salt of the earth people, they had a very tough life. Mum, she loved her 4 children, and on her deathbed in Bankstown Hospital, she said to me, she said, "Gary, don't give up." And I said, "Mum, I won't. We won't."
It is incumbent on us to stop sticking our head in the sand when it comes to this issue. It is appalling, it is difficult, but these women, these communities absolutely demand it. They are demanding that we do something about it now. And we know when it comes to these matters, it's difficult and there is resistance. It's going to cost money. It's going to mean resources. But so what? There is someone either still active, who knows, murdering people. There is someone sitting in a retirement home getting away literally with murder. That stops today. I'll never give up until we get the resources put into this matter.
Those individuals could still be alive. I always think about the serial predators living in the suburbs, because ultimately it is the unexpected. It is the person who looks innocent, who you walk past every day and say hi to, who's, you know, shopping in the same place as you. They're not monsters. They don't stand out. So those individuals could still be alive, which means they could still be brought to justice.
And support information for the issues raised can be found online at channel4.com/support. And could there finally be a breakthrough? A new lead and advanced DNA technology give a glimmer of hope to the families desperate for answers as Murders in Paradise, the Byron Bay killings, continues next.
We don't expect people to vanish from our lives, never to be heard of again.
67 women murdered or missing between Newcastle and Byron Bay, and their cases remain unsolved.
The police thought Leanne was just a runaway. That was it.
She would never turn her back on her children, never.
Many of these cases are linked.
Had patterns been missed?
There was a serial killer or serial killers operating on the mid-north coast.
One of the last times I ever hitchhiked. It shook me to the core.
There's a highway that runs from Newcastle to Byron Bay, and along that highway there are 67 murdered and missing women, unsolved cases. They were women going about their everyday lives, going home after work.
Justice hasn't been done, and because of that we've all suffered.
walking down the street.
You always hope, but experience teaches you that there's no such thing as closure in this world.
Coming home from school.
It's like the never-ending battle. Like it just never stops because there's no answers.
Abducted, murdered and dumped in somewhere remote where it required local knowledge. It is impossible to think that there are 67 murderers that have escaped justice. Someone has done these things repeatedly.
Young girls out there, stay home with their mums and dads because it's a cruel world out there.
I've worked with families of victims of crime for many years now, and personally I never give up hope looking for answers. My name is Dr. Xanthi Mallet, and I'm an Associate Professor of Criminology at Central Queensland University. I looked at a number of different victim groups, clusters of victims along that highway, from the Newcastle area up to Byron. We've got the Bellingen cluster, the Newcastle cluster, and a cluster that we did find of interest was what we class as the Stockrington cluster. So this goes from 1993 to 1994. We have Alison Newstead, who was 17, Melissa Astill, who was just 14, and Melissa Hunt, who was 22. Alison was last seen by her parents on Wednesday, the 6th of October, when she left her Cessnock home in 1993, heading to a cafe, and her body was actually found a week later in an abandoned colliery in Pelton. Melissa Astill was 14. Her body was found near a Lake Macquarie coal mine. And Melissa Hunt was 22 at the time. She was found near a dam in Stockrington. We know they were murdered. They are all currently unsolved. What we found interesting in this case, if geographically, if you plot those on a map, they kind of form this triangle. Now, that could reflect an offender's comfort zone. So areas where they feel comfortable with their activity, where they believe they're less likely to get caught. So again, we're talking a very small period of time. We're talking only October 1993 when Alison disappeared through to 25th of April 1994 when Melissa Hunt disappeared. So you have to think, you know, that would be quite a significant occurrence if all three of those women were abducted and murdered in that short space of time and there was no link between them. I do think there are similarities between the victimology in the kind of Newcastle-based cluster and the Stockrington cluster. And I would like to see more analysis done on whether the same predator could be responsible for some of these victims. Gordana Katevsky is a very high-profile case. Again, it's kind of around that Newcastle area, so people are very aware of that case. And although there are similarities with the Stockrington cluster, I think she should be looked at individually.
Gordana was a joyous child, always laughing, the most amazing laugh. And it's something that will always still be with me. Loving, caring, loved her family, absolutely adored her family and her friends. Just a beautiful soul.
She was skinny when she was a child. I used to put double stockings on her.
To try and fatten up her little legs.
Fatten up her little legs. She was like sticks, yeah. I'm Peggy Katevsky, I'm Gordana's mum.
And I'm Julie Tilevsky, I'm Gordana's auntie. Our Gordana was taken from us in November 1994.
There are grave fears tonight for the safety of a teenage Newcastle girl who's been missing for nearly 24 hours. Her family says her disappearance is completely out of character, leading police to believe she's been abducted.
Gordana was just 16 in November of 1994 and she just finished year 11 at Cardiff High School when she disappeared.
an angel, never been in trouble, never. Very close to me. The girls were at school. I was afternoon shift. I took them in the morning and dropped them off. I think we had a conversation on the phone because there was no mobiles then, and said that her dad'd taken her to Charlestown.
Charlestown Square, it was a very busy shopping centre in Newcastle. It was the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere at the time.
And that was the last time I spoke to her.
We're very concerned. It's almost 15 hours now since it was reported to the police, and this is completely out of character.
Gordana had gone out that evening specifically to buy an outfit to go to her Boys to Men concert. First concert she'd be allowed to go to without adults. Very excited. So sometime during that evening, Gordana had made the decision that she was going to go and visit her Auntie Sonia and show her the items that she'd bought that evening. She made a phone call to Sonia to say, I'm at Charlestown Square, I'm going to come to your place. She left the shopping centre somewhere around after 8:30, 8:45, something like that, crossed the Pacific Highway and made her way down to Powell Street. So it's literally a 5-minute walk to her Auntie Sonia's house from where she left Charlestown Square. So it was still daylight at that time. It was daylight saving. It was a lovely evening, people out and about everywhere. Lots of people at the top of the street with those kids skateboarding and cars going up and down the streets. She had no reason to fear that anything would happen, and she was a smart kid. She would have looked out for herself as best she could.
A teenage girl goes shopping at a large mall, a 5-minute walk from her auntie's house. This should have been an unremarkable, ordinary day. But Gordana never made it to her Auntie Sonia's place.
Sometime after 9 o'clock, as Gordana had not arrived at her Auntie Sonia's place, Sonia and her husband Gary made their way down their driveway, which is quite a long, steep driveway, and started to walk up Powell Street to see if she was on her way. Just as they'd gone down their driveway and started to make their way up Powell Street, they found a torn Maya bag, her wallet and a hairbrush. That's when they realised there was something really bad had happened and rang the police.
It tells me that she didn't enter a vehicle voluntarily. It tells me that she was snatched from the side of the road with force.
Gordana's Auntie Sonia came out of the house because she heard screaming. I think she initially must have thought it was just the skateboarders up the road. And then she and her husband Gary saw a white vehicle tearing off up the street. But didn't put two and two together because at that time, I guess it's just something that was unfathomable. You just don't think that would happen.
When you have some physical evidence, this is gold for the investigators. This is somewhere you may be able to obtain DNA, but you then know that you have an area of canvassing which you can identify and knock on every door within that area to see if anyone saw or heard anything.
Over the next couple of days, it came to fruition that there were quite a few witnesses. The young skateboarders said they saw Gordana heading down Powell Street towards her Auntie Sonia's house. Another neighbour that was driving up the street saw her walking down the street as well. She said she remembered her clearly because she just looked young and happy and had a spring in her step, and she couldn't, take her eyes off of her. Another neighbour had not seen Gordana but had seen a vehicle
It appears Gordana was abducted here, just a few metres from her aunt's home, and not more than a couple of 100 metres from the shopping centre she'd been at with friends a short time before.
Not even 5 minutes of walk, you'd think she'd be safe. I was, very, very disappointed with the police. They just treated it as a matter of fact. Like, it's like a cat's gone missing. Oh, well, we'll find it tomorrow.
It was absolutely heartbreaking.
And I can remember being angry with the detective at the time, prancing around like a bloody, one of those show horses, self-importance look, and talking down to you. And, there was no reason for her to disappear whatsoever.
Like so many of these disappearances, basic police work just wasn't done.
Apart from a couple of big ground searches, we did it all ourselves. We had four-wheel drive clubs contacting us saying, we're free, we can come and help, what do you want to do? I remember at one point we were raising funds to try and get private helicopters up in the air and looking, because we just didn't feel like we were being supported by the police.
When you bluntly say to them, look, it's out of character, she wouldn't go anywhere, didn't have a boyfriend, didn't do this, didn't do that, what are you going to do about it?
We don't expect people to vanish from our lives, never to be heard of again. It's certainly very concerning that so many young women can go missing and be murdered in such a small geographic area, and for those cases to remain unsolved.
These young women were taken against their will.
I'm convinced many of these cases are linked. I believe that there was a serial killer or serial killers operating on the mid-north coast.
The Pacific Highway between Newcastle and Byron Bay is a 700-kilometre highway of horror, with 67 women murdered or missing. Over and over, women kidnapped and murdered, and just silence. And the murderers are still out there. I'm Dimity Clancy. I'm a reporter with 60 Minutes, and I've covered crime for a lot of my career. To have so many women go missing or be murdered in the one area and their cases remain unsolved is truly shocking. Nobody, not even police, had any idea of the scale of the problem until politician Jeremy Buckingham went public in October 2024.
Never before has the maxim justice delayed is justice denied been more applicable. If I hadn't have acted, if I hadn't have started looking, these women would have just drifted off into the mists of time. Their families demand, and I demand, an assurance that we, like them, will never forget their loved ones, never forget what happened to them, and never rest until we have some justice. And it shouldn't be my job. It shouldn't have been my job to put this together. The police, if they'd been doing their job, would have looked at this and said, there's a connection, there's a pattern, and we've got to do something to find out what's going on. A lot of these women and these young girls died in appalling, appalling circumstances. It's hard not to be affected when you look at these stories. Many of the women disappeared or their bodies were found in remote areas where you would need local knowledge. They were on by roads. They were up forestry roads. They were on fire trails. Or they disappeared walking home on a suburban road. you would need local knowledge.
Byron Bay is interesting because, you know, we have a lot of young people travelling through there, very transient population, and I think that there is some sort of dark undertone in Byron that hasn't been fully investigated. There's a very easy route between Newcastle and the Byron area. How many young people will come to Australia as travellers, for example? They'll start in Sydney. Sydney is only a couple of hours by train from Newcastle. It's easy to move up the highway from there. There's lots of beaches off there. You know, it's really a stunning part of the world. So it's very easy to move between as a tourist, but it's also very easy to move around if you are a predator. Locals will know those areas really well, and they will work in a criminal capacity. Occupations could vary. They could be things like truck drivers, taxi drivers, they could be salesmen who are using that highway. So anyone who's really going up and down within that space. So they may be travelling between Newcastle and Byron or down to Sydney and Byron, or they may be acting in discrete pockets. Whilst Jeremy and the public is particularly interested in females who are missing and murdered on that stretch, what we have to remember is offenders aren't necessarily that selective. And actually you can miss patterns in this data in terms of serial predation by limiting it by biological sex. So as I move forward through the data analysis in the months to come, I'm going to broaden out and include males because I think it's detrimental to the analysis to exclude them.
Two recent cases have reignited fears of a serial killer in Byron Bay. 18-year-old Théo Hayez, a tourist from Belgium, disappeared in 2019 and has never been found.
This was the last video of the backpacker partying at Cheeky Monkey's nightclub before staff asked him to leave. The 18-year-old Googled directions to his hostel but walked in the other direction, never to be seen again.
And the other is Melbourne man Jackson Stacker, who was found stabbed in the chest in bushland near Byron Bay. The coroner couldn't rule either suicide or murder, so it's no wonder that the locals of Byron Bay believe there could be a killer in their midst.
I know a lot of the locals, and all of them say there's definitely a serial killer operating in the district.
I came to Byron in 2008 and there was something really special about this place. It was magical. My name is Laura Clare. For a profession, I'm a content creator. I came to live in Byron Bay when I was 21 years old and I didn't have much money and I lived paycheck to paycheck. At that time, I don't even think I had a car license. I had good intentions that I'd, ride a bicycle into town all the time and, or I'd walk, but the days get so hot here and it gets so humid that if you get stuck and you're exhausted, there wasn't Uber back then or Lyft or anything like that. It's either you got a taxi home or you found your way. You hitchhiked.
It's not unusual to see people hitchhiking around here for socio-economic reasons. People are backpacking and so on.
2008 was one of the last times I ever hitchhiked. I was with my friend and we had been in Byron all day. It was very hot. And we were going back to my house. And I suggested that we hitchhiked. She was very resistant to hitchhiking, and she'd sort of said to me, I don't want to, it's not safe. And I'd made her feel better that we were only going a short distance and that it would be totally fine. Someone pulled up very quickly. It was a white van, and there was a male driver in his 30s. It had a sliding back, and I put her in the back of the van. and closed it shut. And then I went to get in the front with him, and that's when I noticed a knife on the front seat. So the knife was about this big, and it had rust along the face of the blade, and it looked old. There was a bit of uncomfortability in the air, so I said, "What's the knife for?" And he said, "I'm a chef." And I remember just taking a minute and sitting in silence with that, and it didn't look like a chef's knife. It was rusty, and I said to him, where are you a chef? I thought maybe I'd know where he worked and that would make me feel more comfortable. He said, "Oh, I'm out of work at the moment." Chefs are so particular about their knives. You know, they usually carry it in a case and would never put it on the floor and just have it lying around.
Maybe it was intended to scare them, intimidate them. It's fairly unusual behaviour, even by Byron Bay standards.
So I didn't report it to the police. I didn't even think about reporting it to the police, to be honest. He let us out. And in my head, he couldn't have been a murderer or, you know, someone dangerous because he let us out. I never considered, at the time, I was young, you know, I didn't consider all the different scenarios that could have happened.
I would imagine there would be thousands of unreported incidents of women, of bad male behaviour in hitchhiking because, A, they weren't supposed to hitchhike. They'd be in trouble by their parents.
In some cases, Laura's story is completely unremarkable. She does claim that she saw a knife, but other than that, there is nothing to suggest that her and her friend were in harm's way. But then she saw Jeremy Buckingham's parliamentary speech.
After I saw Jeremy's video, I decided to post on TikTok about my experience, and the response was alarming. The reaction of women that had had scary experiences in that area was so unbelievably high. I had hundreds of women commenting and reaching out to me privately, talking about their own experiences or experiences that their mums had had. I had private messages about family members, women whose father, they think their father might have been involved in things, uncles, deathbed confessions. Yeah, these responses were very haunting. It shook me to the core.
Let's be realistic here. Everyone is capable of homicide. Everybody. But the ones that pray and plan, how do you detect that? How do you know that your neighbour next door or your friend down the road's not a serial killer? It's something that's concerning, and you just never know.
Serial killers are generally driven by the need for power, and it's a perverse fusion of sex drive, high libido, and controlling the victims, which gives them that sense of power and sexual thrill. I'm Tim Watson-Munro. I'm a criminal psychologist with 47 years' experience. I'm an expert in assessing serial killers. They're often very difficult to detect because they have a chameleon-like ability to blend into the community.
They may start as people who, stalk, for example. Stalking is one of those gateway behaviours, as I would describe it. They may then develop into sex offenders and then potentially into murderers if they don't get the same psychological high that the crimes used to give them. Fundamentally, the principle is the same. They want to dominate and control, and they will use a number of mechanisms to do that. Many of these people who are serial predators, the worst of the worst, they are so innocuous and harmless looking that, people do trust them. They do get in the cars because they just look so pedestrian. You don't see the darkness.
Although so many of these cases have remained unsolved for decades, witnesses have come forward.
After I raised this issue in the Parliament, I received a letter from a woman I'm going to call Mary. I'm going to do that because she lives in fear for her safety.
This letter outlines extremely disturbing allegations.
What she said was her family member had been involved in dozens of homicides across northern New South Wales, may well be responsible for some of these disappearances and murders, and that he was a close and long-term associate and friend of Ivan Milat.
The letter itself claimed that her partner, we'll call him John, had shared a cell with Ivan Milat. So there's a very strong connection there.
She said that he would come home routinely, spattered in blood. That he would come home with mementos, wallets, clothes.
Mary, she comes home one day early. To find a large amount of blood on the bed. He informs her that he's cut his toe, but the amount of blood on the bed didn't correspond to a toe injury, and she was concerned about that. There was chains in the bathroom. That's very disturbing.
Equipment was found in his car that could be best described as a hit kit. This involved knives, weapons, means of disposing of evidence and so on.
We call this often a knock kit, being knocked off. It's a knock kit. And inside you'd have ropes, you'd have masking tape, blindfolds, etc. You'd have a knife.
When he was questioned about this, his response was that he carried this equipment in case somebody was broken down on the road. You don't carry weapons around in your car and rope on the off chance you might find someone stranded on the road. And maybe if you did find someone stranded on the road with that sort of equipment, you have it for a nefarious purpose.
Mary's most explosive allegation relates to a possible link to the abduction of 16-year-old Gordana Katevsky in 1994.
Mary said she was woken up late at night downstairs. Her daughter was sitting with a young woman who seemed that she was discombobulated. She seemed confused. This was in a house that she shared with John that was in a remote area, and she couldn't explain where this woman had come from or why she was in the house. Her and her daughter were asking questions. Where have you come from? Why are you here? She couldn't answer. John said, I will put her to bed. You go back to bed. In the morning, she was gone, and John was saying she has disappeared. She's headed off. She must have had a sleep and gone. And that was it. Later, Mary said she saw images of missing teenager Gordana Katevsky, who disappeared from the Newcastle region at that time, and she is convinced, and her daughter is too, that was Gordana Katevsky sitting on the step. This one was something that really made me sit up and take notice, and something that I've brought to the attention of the police.
I felt that we were not dealing with somebody that was histrionic, but somebody who was concerned about what was going on.
From the research, we don't think there is one major predator, but we believe there are 2, 3, maybe as many as 4 that have acted as serial predators during that time. But some of those individual repeat offenders may still be alive. So they may be in their 70s or their 80s, but that doesn't mean that they can't be brought to justice now.
Elizabeth Bromfield, 31. Harmony Bryant, 26. Cheryl Birchall, 28. For years, and in fact decades, the victims of these egregious and horrendous acts have cried out from beyond the grave for justice. Jasmine Morris, 19. Liesl Smith, 23. Oh my God. Their families wake daily wondering what happened to their child, mother, aunt, sister, partner and friend, hoping for justice and some resolution. Initially, the New South Wales Police said they were aware that Mary had made the allegations to them previously, repeatedly. They said that there was nothing in them and that there was no connection with Malat. Just a week after they said that to me, I got a phone call from senior police that said, actually, we've had a look at it. We think we need to look at it more thoroughly. I was hopeful that we could get some resolution. And now they've come back to me and saying, we're wrapping it up, we don't think there's much in there. I'm not convinced. I think this needs a very, very thorough investigation, because the case that Mary has laid out fits neatly as a puzzle piece into this conundrum, into this question we have about what happened to all these people.
Many of these cases would now be described as cold cases, and what in essence that means is that all investigative leads have been followed and there's nothing outstanding. That doesn't mean that the case is closed. They remain open, and if new leads become available, they will absolutely follow those, whether the case is a week old, a year old, or 40 years old.
These cases might be historical, but that doesn't mean they can't be solved. As a detective, Damien Loon played a vital role in solving one of Australia's most infamous cold cases, the disappearance and murder of Lynette Dawson.
Lynn Dawson was aged 33 when she went missing in January of 1982. She was the mother of 2 young children and married to a famous footballer. I commenced those inquiries for the next 16 years. I was told throughout my investigation to drop the matter because it'd never be solved, and I didn't believe that, and I believed in the family, and to say that she'd never leave her children.
Well, can we ask you any questions about what
Nearly
happened?
40 years later, we had a conviction. Chris Dawson, the husband, was charged and subsequently found guilty.
It's our time to begin living our lives without having this hanging over our heads. Chris Dawson has had 40 years of freedom. Now it's our turn.
So really it's a case that proves that you should never give up on these women. That even after so many years, if you keep digging, if you keep going in the search for answers, you can get there.
I do have a day where I just lay in bed and think, emptiness. It's always, the emptiness is there, no matter what. I could laugh, I could cry, I could have a joke, but inside it's that emptiness and gut-wrenching. You can't move on. You're not capable of moving on. Gordana's friends are going on holidays. I see them on Facebook. They have children. They've got good jobs, and she would have succeeded in life. The unknown. What would she have been like?
I'm doing this now in the hope that someone somewhere knows something about Susan's disappearance.
Well, it's hard. Like, I've got nowhere to go and sit and talk to Leanne. To keep their name out there just in case, someone gets a guilt trip and comes forward. It's always a good thing to, that someone, they're just not forgotten.
If anyone knows what happened to Gordana, go to the police just to have an answer and a closure, some sort of a closure and a bit of peace.
These families don't have a resting place for their loved one. They don't have a place they can go and share stories or reflect or celebrate their loved one. The last interaction you have with that person is that they disappear and you don't know what happened to them. Yeah, that's not good enough.
I believe now, in this era now of our technology and our advancements, particularly in DNA technology, that some of these homicides that have been ruled by the coroner can be fully investigated and perhaps lead to a person responsible to be put before the court. And I'm eager for this to happen.
What I would like to do is actually collaborate with the police, because I think from a researcher's point of view, I can bring fresh eyes to this, I can bring a new perspective to this, and I'm very hopeful that if we do collaborate and bring our resources together, that we can actually bring answers for some of these families.
You can catch a killer. The community demands it. Because in some cases, there actually hasn't been a proper investigation, and that just cannot stand. Right now, there is someone either still active, who knows, murdering people. There is someone sitting in a retirement home, getting away, literally with murder. That stops today. I'll never give up until we get that Special Commission of Inquiry and the resources put into this matter.
So in January 2024, I wrote a letter to our current Police Commissioner in New South Wales, putting before her the history of the case and begging for her to perhaps find out what was going on with Susan's case. I received a very brief acknowledgement of my letter. I accept that Susan is not the only disappearance, suspected murder in the state. But heavens above, 1989, Coroner's Inquest 2010, meeting with the Minister for Police 2019, letter to the Commissioner January 2024, and I have no idea what's happening, if anything, about Susan's case. Except that I've been told, Gary, those two things that are against you. Nobody's been found and 35 years have lapsed.
People ask me, what makes you keep going? I don't bloody know. For something to be hidden and for nothing to come out till this day, to be in the dark 30 years after.
Well, it's sad, you know, it's it's sad to think, you know, that she's a victim of neglect. Really? Yeah, so neglect by the New South Wales Police Force. Yeah, so that's very hard to think, you know, with myself having children, to think if anything happened to them and the police not do anything about it is just horrendous. It's just pure neglect. You know, between, you know, like with 67 unsolved cases, you know, you think that, you know, you think something would have been done about it a long time ago. You know, a long, long time ago. And why wasn't there anything done about it years ago? It's just why?
And support information for the issues raised can be found online at channel4.com/supports. And there's more in the way of true crime and one of the largest murder inquiries ever conducted by the Bedfordshire Police. Stream episode 1 of 24 Hours in Police Custody, Murder is No Game, with the next episode tomorrow night at 9.